All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ken Wiseman with the Rural Utility Service Telecommunications Program, and I want to welcome you to today's Distance Learning and Telemedicine Grant Program webinar, where we will discuss the fiscal year 2026 requirements and steps and great information for you to use as you apply to the program. We have three presenters today. We will have Tamisha Smith, who is one of our General Field Representatives in the Loan Origination and Approval Division. Following her will be Shannon Legree, the Field Staff Branch Chief for a group of General Field Representatives in the Loan Origination and Approval Division. And last but most certainly not least, Shekinah Pepper, the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Loan Origination and Approval Division. Next slide, please. Our agenda today, we'll do an introduction starting out for the program, where you will learn about the program and its high-level items. Then we will start getting into details, such as eligibility. We're going to walk you through how to complete an application. We're going to list a number of available resources that will be here for you to use as you move through this application period. And with time left, we will take as many questions and provide as many answers as we possibly can. Next slide, please. Tamisha, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Tamisha Smith, and I do cover the areas of Florida, Georgia, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Islands. So this is the introduction to the program. Next slide, please. The hierarchy of authority for the DLT program is covered in Statute 7 USC 950 AAA ET in sequence. The regulation there is provided. We do follow regulations 7 CFR 1734, so parts A and B. And there is a NOFO, which is referred to as the latest notice of funding opportunity, that has been posted also for your reading and further discretion. The DLT application guide has been updated. It has been updated to represent fiscal year 2026. So this is just the introduction of the DLT program and some resources that you can take upon to further educate yourself on how our program works. Next slide, please. In addition, distance learning means an interactive telecommunications link to an end user through the use of eligible equipment for the following purpose: provide educational programs, instruction, or information originating in one area, whether rural or not, to students and teachers who are located in rural areas. Telemedicine is an interactive telecommunications link to an end user through the use of eligible equipment, which electronically links medical professionals at separate sites in order to exchange healthcare information in audio, video, graphic, or other format for the purpose of providing improved healthcare services, primarily to residents of rural areas. So the basic eligibility of the program: it must benefit rural residents, both in reduced travel and improved access to service. Next slide. Highlighted fiscal year 26 changes. The funding and awards. The total funding that has been allocated is $27 million. We expect to expend approximately 40 awards. And please note that the selection will be highly competitive. The scoring, there has not been any change in scoring, so we still require scoring in the areas of rurality, economic need, projected benefits. You do receive 10 points for each of the socially vulnerable removed areas per EO 14151. The key similarities from fiscal year 25, fiscal year 26, applicants are still required to provide a match contribution of at least 15% of the grant amount. The grants still range from $50,000 to $750,000. Our target audience: the program still targets nonprofits for business profits, tribes, state, local governments, and units thereof, and IHEs, particularly for projects serving rural areas with populations under 20,000. Next slide. Eligibility. Here's some more in-depth information on how to be qualified for our program. Next slide. Applicant eligibility. To be eligible for the DLT program, the applicant must be one of the following entity types: incorporated organization, for-profit or not-for-profit, Indian tribe or tribal organization as defined in 25 USC, state or local government, state or local unit of government, a consortium as defined in 7 CFR 1734.3, or operate a rural community facility or deliver distance learning or telemedicine services to entities that operate a rural community facility or to residents in rural areas. Each applicant must provide written evidence of his legal capacity to contract with RUS to obtain the grant. Each applicant must be able to implement the project, own the assets, and comply with all applicable program requirements. Next slide. A consortium is a combination or a group of entities formed to undertake the purposes for which the DLT financial assistance is being requested. And this is just an additional entity that may be eligible. A formal, I'm sorry, I just read that part. So a formal consortium is one that has the legal ability to contract with the federal government and can apply in the name of a formal consortium. An informal consortium, as it applies to the DLT program, is multiple entities choosing to share grant responsibilities and asset ownership. One entity serves as the host organization to apply on behalf of the group. Each individual entity must meet the eligibility criteria and contract with RUS. Next slide. Additional eligibility requirements. Matching contribution of at least 15% of the requested grant amount and must be used for the eligible grant purposes. Tribal government resolutions or a letter of consent. If a DLT project proposes service on or over tribal lands and the applicant is non-tribal, then a letter of consent is required from each tribal council with jurisdiction over the tribal lands to be served. However, if a DLT project proposes infrastructure construction or deployment on over tribal lands, then a tribal resolution is required from the tribal government with jurisdiction over the tribal lands to be served. Any non-tribal applicant that fails to meet this requirement will not be eligible for funding. Please review Appendix A of the DLT application guide for a sample tribal government resolution. Next slide, please. A continuation of eligible grant purposes. The eligible grant purposes are acquiring and installing by lease or purchase eligible equipment. If leased, the cost of the lease during the 3-year life of the grant is eligible. Purchases of extended warranties, site licenses, and maintenance contracts. Acquiring or developing instructional programming that is a capital asset, including the purchase or lease of instructional programming already on the market. Providing technical assistance and instruction for usable eligible equipment that's going to be limited to 10% of the grant. Purchasing and installing broadband facilities. The facilities must be applicant owned and used for providing distance learning or telemedicine services. This is limited to 20% of the requested grant amount. Next slide. Examples of eligible equipment: computer hardware and software, audio-visual equipment, monitors and other display devices, telemedical devices, broadband facilities if owned by the applicant, cybersecurity software that's directly related to the funded project, video conferencing platform licenses directly related to funding the project. The application must demonstrate that the predominant purpose, which is 50% or more of use of every line item in the grant and the match budget, meets the DLT grant definition of distance learning or telemedicine. Next slide. Some ineligible grant purposes. The grant cannot be used for application preparation costs, salaries, wages, or employee benefits, costs of medical or educational services, such as subscriptions to service platforms, operating or recurring expenses, including broadband connection fees, equipment not having telemedicine or distance learning as its essential function, costs incurred prior to RUS receipt of a complete application. Next slide, please. A continuation of ineligible grant purposes: building, construction, renovation, or alteration, duplicate facilities already providing adequate DLT services, projects whose sole objective is to provide a link between sites at the same facility, any purpose not specifically contained in 7 CFR 1734.21. We advise you to please refer to the fiscal year 2026 DLT application guide for additional information. Next slide, please. Okay, so thank you. That completes my portion of eligibility.
All right, thank you, Tamisha. Now we'll move forward with the completing of an application. Next slide. We have our registration requirements. Next slide. Part of those registration requirements is that you must have an active SAMS registration, and that's going to be taking place via SAMS.gov. The SAMS platform is not a RUS or Rural Development Platform. This is a separate system, but you must have a valid SAMS registration prior to submission of your application for the DLT program. When going in and logging in for a SAMS registration, if you haven't done this previously, it's going to take anywhere between 12 to 15 business days after submittal for your registration to become active. When looking at going through that process, the SAMS system, it must be the entity's legal name. The system also has fields for entering doing business as. Keep in mind, your SAMS registration must be active prior to the submission of the application, as well as if you were to receive an award from the agency, it must remain active for the grant period itself. Also within that SAMS registration, there is a financial assistance, representations, and certifications that must be made as well. If these certifications were not made when creating or updating your SAMS registration, they must be made before applying. But applying the edit for SAMS registration to include these certifications before applying. Next slide. Going back to the SAMS registration, the applicant will be asked its name, wish to apply for a federal financial assistance project or program, or is the entity itself currently the recipient of funding under a federal financial assistance program, project, or program. The system default is always going to go to a no. We're going to ask that you change that no to a yes. And again, the applicant must make the certification and representation required of entities which are applying for or have received funding under a federal financial assistance project or program in order to be eligible for the DLT program. And again, it's going to be default to no, but we're going to want you to go ahead and change your response to yes. And on our next slide, you'll see an example of that. Next slide, please. Here you see that certification itself. And here you see where the arrow is pointing that it has been defaulted to no. And again, you must change that to yes. Next slide. Also within the SAMS.gov registration process, you must have a unique entity identifier, the UEI, and that's required for the submission of the application as well. Again, the UEI, to obtain the UEI, that is free as long as you register in SAMS.gov. And again, this UEI must be for the applicant, not your affiliate, your subsidiary, or even your parent company. The active UEI will be used to submit your application in grants.gov. In addition to the UEI and the SAMS registration, you must also have an active login.gov account. You'll need an email address to register for this as well. In addition to those items, you must have the grants.gov account. For registration in grants.gov, you must have your email address, phone number, the organization's name, the organization's active UEI, and login.gov account will be used to create a grants.gov applicant account itself. From there, you will create a username and password and link your grants.gov account with your login.gov account. Next slide. Components of a complete application. Next slide, please. Here you see the various components of our complete application, all the way from letter A through N. We're going to touch on all of these components briefly to give you some highlights of what constitutes a completed application for our DLT program. Well, for example, A, that's the standard form SF424. You have your description of the project sites, the executive summary. You have your scope of work, matching funds. You also have the supplemental information. In addition to that, you also must have the consultation with the USDA state director, just to name a few of those components before we go into each one of those. And also, our DLT application guide, again, has been updated for fiscal year 2026. And this is a great resource of information for you to use for the submission of a completed application. Next slide. Here we have our DLT sample worksheets. They are available to you on our DLT website when you go to the tab Apply button. But we have those worksheets available for our DLT description of your project sites, the rurality calculation, the economic need calculation, as well as the matching funds calculation. And also we have our line item budget sample worksheet for your usage as well. Next slide. When it comes to attachments and submitting those attachments, we do not take paper applications for our DLT program. All applications are going to be submitted via grants.gov for us to be in receipt by our agency itself. When you're going to be submitting those applications, you're going to have that SF424, which is the application itself. You must focus on block 15 to add all of your attachments. That's the only block that you will be able to add attachments to. You do not have to add one single attachment. You can add multiple attachments. They do not have to be in a specific order, but it does help our reviewers if you put those attachments in the order of the application itself as referenced within the application guide. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about your description of the project sites. Next slide. Here you see the different types of project sites. We have hub sites, end user sites, a hub and end user site, non-fixed sites, and sometimes we do have hybrid sites as well. The hub site itself is a facility that is part of a network or telecommunications system that provides educational or medical services to end users or the hub/end user sites. And keep in mind, a pure hub site receives no end user benefits at all. Next, you have those end user sites. And that is a facility that is part of the network or telecommunications system that is utilized by the end users. You have the hub/end user site, and this site performs both functions. It acts as a hub site as well as accommodates end users. And sometimes we have non-fixed end user sites. In this case, that's a case in which we have equipment that are going to rural residents' homes or in mobile facilities and the project will be deemed a non-fixed end user site application since the end user sites will change consistently. So we'll actually use the hub site as a proxy for the rurality calculation itself. Next slide. You also have to describe these project sites themselves. And they also must include a description of the participating hubs, end users, and hub/end user sites. The number of rural residents to be served by the project at each end user and each hub/end user site. The location of each end user site or hub/end user site. And that is also going to entail the congressional district, the city, the town, village, borough, or rural area, and the state itself. Our DLT map can help identify those congressional districts. And again, you must list all locations that are going to receive grant-funded equipment or will function as a critical piece of the proposed project itself. Remember, our application guides can provide assistance with that. So we're asking that you please review that. And again, that information is available on our DLT website under the Apply tab. Next slide. Also, we have our executive summary, which is another part of the complete application process. Next slide. So this is what we're going to look for within that executive summary itself and how it's going to provide the reviewers with the first overall glimpse into what your proposed project is once they start the review. What should it include? Why is the project needed? How is the applicant address these needs? Description of the applicant, including documentation of eligibility. Explanation of total project cost, and a breakdown of the grant and its matching funds contribution. You should also have a statement specifying if the project is distance learning or telemedicine, or you may have to have a statement that is going to specify if the proposed project is to reduce substance abuse, use disorder, including opioid misuse in rural areas. Next slide. At the end of the executive summary, we must have a publicly releasable project description. You may ask why we need this piece of information. All of our projects that we fund under DLT, we're going to make notice of these projects to Congress. Congress wants a snapshot of what these projects are within their congressional districts that we're actually going to approve and provide funding for. So we're asking that you provide this information, which consists of a project title, description of the proposed end user and hub/end user sites, a brief project description, total estimated population affected by the project, and how you arrived at that number. We also give you an opportunity to find what an example is. An example for a distance learning or telemedicine project can be found on page 14 of our application guide. Next slide, please. Now let's go into our scoring criteria. Next slide. First up is our reality score. The maximum amount of points that can be received for reality is up to 40 points. We use the census information to help determine this point scoring criteria. That's why the census is so important for everyone to complete that information as it rolls around within that 10-year, every 10-year time frame. An end user site itself is a facility that will be used by end users to receive services for the project. The project equipment must be placed at the site for it to be considered an end user site for scoring purposes. Applicants will use both the DLT map and the census data to determine rurality. That's one note here. If there are areas that you're going to be working in that have incarcerated populations or limited military-based populations with up to 1,500 residents, they will be excluded and when determining a rural area themselves. Also, you see the link for the DLT map, and it also can be found on our DLT website under To Apply as well. Next slide. Going back to this rurality scoring, the maximum can be up to 40 points, and the minimum, well, the very least amount can be 0 points itself. But you see what that point scoring criteria is. Exceptionally rural areas, that's a population of 5,000 or less, 40 points. A rural area, 5,001 to 10,000, 30 points. And you see so forth how the scoring metrics play out as the population increases and we get to a highly urban area over 20,000 with 0 points. Non-fixed end user site projects have a rurality determined by the hub site itself. And again, additional guidance can be found within our application guide. Next slide, please. Our economic needs scoring. This is up to 30 points are available for this point scoring criteria as well. And it's going to be used to evaluate the relative financial need of the applicant, community, and the project itself. All applicants are required to provide applicable SAI PE poverty percentage based upon the counties where the hubs, end user sites, or the hub/end user site are to be located. Using the current SAIPE county level data spreadsheet, which has been posted to the DOT website to look up SAIPE data will be required. End user sites located in geographic areas for which no SAIPE data exists will be determined to have an average SAIPE poverty percentage rate of 30%. Such geographic areas may include territories of the United States or other locations eligible for funding through the DOT grant program. Next slide, please. The project economic needs scoring percentages will be determined by the average scores for all end user and hub end user sites. Here you see how that breakdown for those percentages. If you have a county with a poverty average level greater than 30%, it's going to be 30 points. If it's anywhere from greater to 20% but less than 30%, it's going to be 20 points. And you see how those point scoring criteria go down as the level goes down as well, because it could be 10 points and then it could be as little as 0. Next slide, please. Now we're up to our needs and benefits scoring criteria, which also has a point scoring total of 30 points. What do we want to do here? We want to measure the extent to which the proposed project meets the needs for distance learning or telemedicine within rural areas. We're going to be evaluating the status of the economic, educational, or healthcare challenges facing the project's respective communities. You're going to be tasked with providing any documentation that demonstrates those challenges. You have to substantiate and quantify these challenges with verifiable data and statistics. Address why you, the applicant, cannot afford to complete this project without grant assistance. Document support for the project provided by professionals in education as well as healthcare. And also keep in mind, any economic data used in this section should not be duplicative of data used for the economic needs scoring criteria itself. Next slide, please. Also, evaluate the benefits derived from the services provided by the proposed project. You have to document the specific benefits of the project and quantify them in terms of expected outcomes. Tie those benefits back to the project directly to the stated needs of the project and its intended address. Here's an example of that. You're going to have a distance learning project that serves a secondary school. Tell us how many schools are going to be assisted and how many students will benefit from these services from your given project. Next slide, please. Also, we want to address the local community involvement and support that goes into the planning, implementing, and financial assistance for your project itself. That can include any participation, whether it be community meetings, public forums, surveys, letters that have gone out to community, people in the community that support the project themselves. We want to see that type of information within your application. You're going to be tasked with documenting the willingness of local end users or community-based organizations to contribute costs of completing, operating, or maintaining the project is a strong indication that you have a lot of community support as well. And again, those letters of support, whether it be financial or non-financial commitment towards the project, should be included with your application from local organizations, because we want to see that the community is involved and supporting your project. Next slide. Now let's talk about our matching funds requirement. Next slide, please. Matching funds. Although this is a grant program, we do require that is a 15% match of the requested grant amount, and the specific amount itself must be included within the project's budget. We do allow for cash or in-kind contributions as well. If you're going to be an in-kind contribution, we do allow for machinery and equipment, but it must be non-depreciated equipment with an established value and may be considered as an in-kind match. Keep in mind, vendor discounts or supplied equipment is not considered as an eligible match. Future revenues are also not considered as an eligible match. And the match itself must be for otherwise approved eligible grant purposes and integral to the project as outlined in 7 CFR 1734.21, which is the DLT regulation itself. Keep in mind that those applicants that are going to be putting in an application to provide services in American Samoa, Guam, the Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands are exempt from the matching requirement for fiscal year 2026 for 2026. If any part of the in-kind line item itself is for an ineligible purpose, that line item cannot be budgeted for the match. Next slide, please. Also, when it talks about federal funds themselves are not eligible as matching funds unless specifically authorized by the federal statute. If that is the case, we must have documentation of that statutory exception for the matching funds to be considered. If the project is located in an eligible area under counties in Appalachia or the Appalachian Regional Commission, those funds themselves may be used as matching contribution. Documentation for any match using non-federal funds as matching funds, we must have that documentation in the form of a letter from the guarantor. That letter must be explicit, detailing what those funds are to be used for and have no limitations or exclusions, and the funds must be available at the time of your application submission. Next slide. Here I'll turn it over to Shekinah Pepper, who's the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Loan Approval and Origination Branch. Shekinah?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Welcome, everybody. I hope so far it's been enjoyable, and hopefully I don't let you down with the rest of this. Move on to the scope of work. Next slide. So the scope of work is provided as a narrative of what the goals of the project are. This is really where you want to kind of tie it all together. What activities are performed under the project. And remember, we're bureaucrats. We're not educators. We're not medical professionals. So this is a good time for you to explain some of those things that we may not understand of how this is going to fit, what these things are going to kind of do, and how this activity is going to be performed. Also, a lot of these have different components to it, or different consortiums, or a main provider that's working with different groups. And so we want to understand who's going to be carrying out the different activities. Are you going to partner with somebody else to provide certain services? Make sure that you spell that out so that we can understand it. The other thing is timeframes. Now we understand you don't know exactly when this is going to be released. You don't know exactly when it's going to could be awarded, bidding, and all of these other things, but give us kind of an idea of what your objectives are, the activities that go with it, how long you think that's going to take, and then a line item budget for the capital expenditures. And remember, there's a lot of things that would go into a DLT program or a distance learning telemedicine program that may not be eligible So that's where you really want to make sure you understand what's eligible under the program and give us that line item budget that kind of says, okay, this is what these things are and this is how they fit into the program. And like I said, assume that we don't necessarily understand what some of the equipment is or how it's done. Obviously, a computer, we know what a computer is, but there's a lot of stuff that comes in that we don't necessarily know how you're going to use it in the context of your project. And this is a really good time to kind of spell that out and draw us the picture. Next slide. Financial information and sustainability. Next slide. So this is the narrative demonstrating project feasibility. This is where we really want to understand how this project is going to work. How is it going to sustain once we stand it up? One of the things that we want to look at is this isn't going to be a 2-year or 3-year project. How is this going to continue on? How is it going to grow? What is going to happen with this? What are your goals of this? And we know that there may be a lot of it that you just don't know yet, but what is your dream for how this is going to work and how you're going to put it together? And to provide that with as much resources. I mean, we don't want complete pie in the sky, but give us some substance of what you're looking to do and how you envision that this is going to grow and be sustainable. Demonstrate, and this is where Shana talked about this, do you have the sufficient resources? You know, it's one thing to have the 15% match, but do you have people that can implement this? How are you going to get those resources for IT stuff, for some of the other things that you're looking at? Describe how funds and the institutional finance support will sustain this project and services. Include all assumptions. You know, we understand that there's a lot of things that you may not know 100% right now, but letting us know, hey, we're assuming that this is going to lead to this or that we'll have this, and just spell that out. We understand that this is not going to be perfect, but what we're trying to do is get an idea of your vision of what you're doing and how you expect this to kind of continue on. Projects expenses in the budget. That's just something to kind of let us know how this is all going to fit together. Once again, we've already talked about the budget. Cost sharing arrangements between hub and end user sites. So whoever is the awardee for the grant, unless you're in a consortium or something like that, you own and are responsible for delivery of this project. But we've seen a lot of schools that come in that work together. And so understanding how those arrangements are going to work, are other schools going to provide, you know, some of that 15%? How is that going to work? Give us a good understanding so that we can see that you've got the commitment of these different groups, that you've thought through this project and how you're going to partner if it's not all under, say, the applicant's authority. If you're partnering with other clinics or other schools or other types of institutions, we've seen a lot of times where schools and libraries and hospitals come together in really rural areas to develop a really cool program. We just want to understand how that is going to work and what kind of agreements you've made or what kind of agreements you still have to put together. Identify any other items that may affect feasibility or sustainability of the project. This could even be maybe some negative things. Hey, there's some things out here that we're still not sure of, but we're working through just so we can kind of understand how this is going to work. And remember, your scoring is really the big aspect of how we evaluate this. This gives us an understanding of the support that's going to be needed and the feasibility of the project. Next slide. Statement of experience. Next slide. So then this should not be a huge, we don't need everybody's resumes and everything else like that. But we're kind of wanting to know, have you done this before? Have you worked on these types of projects before? Or is this a new experience that you've never dealt with before? And if it is new, how are you going to overcome the lack of experience? Like, do you have resources? Do you have people you can rely on? You know, we partner with another school, or hey, we've got this neighbor next to us that has done this before, and they're going to provide some technical expertise to help us through implementing this and doing these kind of things. You know, a lot of projects, basic project management gets you a long ways, but there's some technical aspects to that, and we just kind of want to understand, have you seen this through? What is your experience? And kind of give us an overview of that. And this is a requirement to be part of a complete application, but it's not something that we're going to say, oh, you have no experience, sorry, you're out. It's not a scoring criteria. It just helps us understand where you're at. Next slide. Telecommunications system plan. This one sometimes stumps a lot of people and they're not really sure. So I'll try to break this down and make it a little bit simple for you to understand what we're looking for. So let's go to the next slide. So you can go into the reg and it reads super amazing. Definitely great bedtime reading. But basically what we're looking for is a narrative and a map and a diagram. So where the site's at and kind of see that on a map. So you can go into Google Earth, put some pins in there and kind of show that's at, and then kind of give a narrative how you see this, putting this through. This is a requirement of submission with the application for it to be a quality application. But we're not looking for like full detailed everything. We're just kind of looking for a general narrative of how you see this kind of pulling out and where things are located. Next slide. So the system plan narrative, what we're kind of wanting you to describe is where are the different locations at? What kind of infrastructure do they have? Do these sites have fiber? Are they on wireless systems? Do they have satellite? What's the capacity of the systems, the telecommunication systems that's going to be running it? I've seen telecommunication systems plans and DLT systems in rural Alaska that was literally hearing tests over old copper telephone lines. And I've seen extensive video conferencing AI systems that require quality fiber networks. So what we're looking for is what you're proposing even possible over the system that you have or the remote systems that they have? If you're looking at, say, a non-fixed site and you're putting it in people's houses, do they have access to quality internet? We are seeing a huge expansion since COVID, that internet is really booming and we build a lot of systems out there, but there's still a lot of places, as you can see from some of the BEAD efforts and some of the other efforts that are out there, there's still a lot of places that don't have fiber internet or don't have gig internet. And so some systems may not work the same. How do you plan on adapting to that based upon those different things if you're looking at a non-fixed site? So what you're looking for within this is just discuss the relationship between these sites. Did you consult with local IT or say the telecom providers and say, hey, is this type of equipment, this is what's needed? Have you looked at your proposed equipment that you're using? What does it require to work efficiently? Did you talk to professionals in the industry, the vendors, and say, hey, what types of internet are required as a minimum level to make sure that this is operating efficiently? There's nothing more frustrating than getting on a Zoom call or a Teams call and you freeze. And that can affect the overall effectiveness of your program. So just something that we want you to consider and discuss and talk about and the involvement in this plan. So maps, drawings, representations of where this stuff is going to be at, what's your proposed, system, and then where are these sites at, and then what kind of network do they have to support them. Next slide. Compliance with other federal statutes. One of the things about dealing with the government is we require you to comply with the government. Kind of seems obvious, but still have to say it. Next slide. So applicants have to attest to some certifications as part of their program. Flood hazard precaution areas, this goes into your flood insurance. Are you in a flood area? Do you need flood insurance? Do you have flood insurance? Those kind of things. Uniform relocation assistance. I really haven't seen this apply too much to the DLT program, but it is something you have to go in and look at and evaluate whether you're going to, the program will relocate people. I can't imagine that's the case under DLT, but it's something you have to certify that if you do, you'll meet certain federal requirements. ABA, architectural barriers. This is certification regarding architectural barriers that you are in compliant with ABA. And then non-duplication of services of certificate. What we're looking at is, does this duplicate something that's already out there? If you definitely want to look at, and even in your narrative and other scopes beyond the certification, is if you've been a DLT recipient in the past, is this duplicating something you've already done? Is it growing what you've already done? And we've seen that before where it's really hard to differentiate between, oh, hey, wait, they got a DLT. How is this different? What are they doing? It looks like similar. Are we buying the same stuff or is it new? Making sure that you explain that in your scope of work and in your executive summary, but also you have to certify that you're not out there duplicating something that's already been funded and it's already existing. Checklist can be found at the DLT website under the To Apply tab. That checklist is, while it seems simple, is very, very important. You need to pull that down. You'll have to go through and check it, and then you'll sign off on it, but we'll get to that in a second. Informal consortium applications. Each entity must provide their own certification. So if you're operating as informal consortium, you don't have a formal agreement, but you've got a bunch of different people that are coming together to form this. And those projects are amazing. We've seen some awesome outcomes when we have a group of people that are just trying to make their community better come together, but we do require that each of them provide that certification and complete these checklists. So make sure that you're going through that. And if you're working with groups that are outside of your organizational structure, that you're aligning all of that stuff. Next slide. So checklist. You sign off at the bottom of it, check through it. It's not overly complex, but that'll give you the information, kind of gives you a nice little picture of what that'll look like. Next slide. Evidence of a legal existence. Remember, this is legal existence. So for those of you in higher education, I think therefore I am is not good enough for the federal government. And the great thing about being on a webinar is I can tell that joke laughed and everybody got it was funny because I can't see or hear any of you. So next slide. Legal existence. So applicants must provide acceptable evidence of legal existence. Corporations must provide evidence of good standing. So you can go to your state secretaries or Secretary of State and get those documents. Most of them have websites that you can do that. School districts, hospital districts, universities provide the statute or resolution or other documentation confirming your legal name. Also, be careful with your SAM.gov, legal name, institutions. If they don't perfectly match up, provide an explanation and make sure that we know what the legal name is. In order for us to contract, in order for us to do all of our checks, we need to know what the legal name is and make sure that's clear. If you have a common DBA, make sure you use your legal name to apply, not your DBA, but you can put that information in there, make sure those things match up. Those are things that we run into pretty commonly, and they can cause issues through the review process. And applying as a consortium, remember all members must be legally established with the authority to contract with the federal government rural utility service. SAM registration. Now, you notice that this is the second or third time we've mentioned this. There's probably a reason for that. This is so simple, and yet it trips up so many people. Make sure you've got your SAM.gov registration. As Shannon said, it can take 10 to 15 days. I wouldn't wait to the end. If that's not in there, it's an automatic, sorry, you're gone. And I'd hate to see a good application thrown out because you don't have your SAM.gov registration in there. Also, make sure your financial assistant reps and certifications are active and that they check the right box. And this is one of those ones where if you've never done this before, we've got some tools and resources out there. Your general field rep is also another resource to make sure you've got this done. But make sure that you have your entity name, your UEI, your SAM registration of the applicant. Also, if you're working together with other entities as a consortium, make sure that they have this stuff set up too. Don't let something simple trip you up. Next slide. Environmental impact and historic preservation. I guess it wasn't historical. Next slide. So anything involving federal funds has to be evaluated under NEPA. Even if it's just financial assistance, we still need to understand what exactly is your project doing. If you're installing equipment, is it going to change anything? Give us a good description of the impact on the facility. Our facility is already set up for this. We do allow for a certain percentage of the application to be for a fiber build. If you are actually going to include that, definitely make sure you have where it's going to be at. And remember, if you do fiber, you have to, whoever the applicant is has to own that. So if you're working with another telco to extend fiber to a facility, they can't own it. You would have to own it. Definitely on something like that, if you're going to work on that, reach out to your GFR, make sure you've got all those details in there. But give us a description of the project in here. And we're looking at it more from the impact on the environment, project locations, those kind of things. Now, typically, these are all CADXs under the DLT program, but we still do have to review them and look at it and make sure that there isn't going to be an impact to the environment. More of what I've seen is potentially the impact is those facilities that are older, that may be historical facilities of putting equipment in there make sure that we understand, hey, if you do have an older facility or historic facility, how are you going to actually install this equipment, and is it going to impact the building or the facility or those kind of things? And this is what we're looking for. It's just a general description. If you're just placing, computers in people's hands, or you're putting monitors in rooms, then probably not going to be a huge environmental impact, but it is something we do have to evaluate. So making sure we have a good description of kind of what you envision the activity is going to be, so that we can look at this and say, yes, this is probably not going to be an impact to the environment, and clear it. Or we have to do our review because you're going to be looking at doing some construction as part of your project. Next slide. Consultation with the state director. Go ahead, next slide. This is not an overly complex process, but you do want to make sure that you give the state director time. And what you'll want to do is discuss availability of other sources from funding, state and local level, anything you've looked at. Provide them with kind of an overview of what you're trying to accomplish and the proposed grant and match amounts. You really want to give the state director as much time as possible. They have a lot of other programs, and so we want to make sure that we have time to do that. Listing of the state offices can be found on our website, which will be linked there. You'll be able to pull this up and look at it. You can also reach out to the Contact Us if you can't get a hold of somebody, you're not sure who it is, or you can reach out to your GFR and they can help you with that. But definitely, the whole point of this is just to coordinate, because our state directors really are that local level, and they have a lot of visibility of what's going on. And they're extremely helpful and beneficial to the project. Plus, it's good for them to know what's kind of going on in their state. So this is just a simple coordination process that we go through. Next slide. Application submission. Next slide. So available resources to assist in completing the application is the application guide. We put a lot of effort into the application guide. It really walks you through, and I know it can maybe seem a little bit overwhelming to begin with, but it literally walks you through step by step what you need to do, and kind of go through and address each section, even if it's a short, 2 or 3 sentences that, hey, we're not sure how this applies, but this is what we're thinking, or in-depth budgets or those kind of things. The application guide really is your source to make sure that you've got everything that we need in order to evaluate your project and make it competitive. DLT application checklist. Once again, this is something you have to pull out, you have to check off, and it basically walks you through each section. You check off that you have those sections in it, you sign it, and you attach that too. That's another thing. If that's not in there, showing that you've checked off that you have all these sections and you signed off that you've done that can make an application incomplete. It's a very simple task, but sometimes people overlook it because it is so simple. So just make sure you pull down that checklist. It is a good tool to have. Sample DLT worksheet. So we've got a lot of resources out there. Our grants manager that really runs this DLT program and does a lot of the coordination for this has spent a lot of time to try to make these worksheets really useful to you and helpful as you work through this. If you're going to be on tribal land, if you're proposing to have a hub or end user site on tribal land, make sure you have a tribal resolution of consent. If you are a tribe and you're submitting this as a tribe, when you submit this, if you're from an official capacity of the tribe, then you don't need a resolution. If it's the actual tribal government that's submitting it, your submission and your certifications are your consent. But if you're not a tribal government, if you're an agency or an LLC or something else that's working with that, make sure you have that documentation in there. All items can be found on the DLT's website under the To Apply tab. Next slide. This is the application checklist. It literally walks you through each section, what's required under each section, and make sure that you have all of that stuff in there. The number of times that either this has been left out or we see somebody upload something and it's missing a section. One of the most frustrating things is throwing out a really good application because they forgot to include something that is part of the application and it's not even considered eligible or complete, and we can't even review it. And like I said, it's just one of those things that this is a tool for you. Utilize it. Make sure you go through, look at all the sections, make sure you've got them all when you're submitting your application. Next slide. Deadline, June 30th, 2026. Submission cutoff is at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure you 11:59 p.m., and that's Eastern time. So those of you out west, it's a little earlier in the day. SAM.gov registration with financial assistant reps and certs. Going to mention this again. Why? Because it trips a lot of people up, and we want to reiterate how important your SAM.gov registration is with the right financial reps and certs. Next slide. Available resources. Next. The DLT website. Lot of great information in there. There's a contact us there, and you can see the contact us is the third one down. That brings you right to our policy and outreach division. They have access to the GFRs, to the grants team, to myself, to get you those answers back, to talk specifically about your project. We are here for technical assistance. We can't help you write your award. We can't necessarily help you on the scoring, but we can't help you with the technical stuff. Yes, this is beneficial. No, this is not. Yeah, that works. This includes, make sure you got that included, or this meets this requirement. Like I said, we have to be careful because it is a competitive and we don't want to give anybody, so we have to be really careful with the scoring criteria. We won't review your scoring ahead of time, but we are here for technical assistance of, hey, how does this meet this? Or what are some things that you've seen that have done this? Or is this what you guys are looking for? Don't try to interpret what government bureaucracy has put out there. Don't try to struggle with like, what exactly are we asking for? Reach out and ask. We have no problem explaining. And a lot of times we have very unique projects that we haven't seen before. Every year we see new stuff. So if you're not really sure, reach out and ask. The worst thing that we can say is, hey, we can't actually help on this part of it because this is competitive. But we can give you some guidance or maybe some suggestions of, hey, this is some stuff that we've seen or some stuff like that. So use this for technical assistance. And then I skipped the second one, general field representatives, for a simple point that I really wanted to emphasize that. So I want to come back to the GFRs. And part of this is I started out as a GFR. I was the field rep for Kansas, Alaska. I've covered Maine and Oklahoma and a few other places. But your GFRs, those are our people in the field in rural America that really care about what we do because they live in those communities. They see the impacts of these things. They know how beneficial these programs are. The town I grew up in, when I graduated, we had two choices. We could either pick chemistry or biology. Those are the only choices we had in our school. Recently, the school I went to was actually part of a DLT project. And they now have like 200 plus classes that people can choose from. That is amazing that the people that are from that small town now have those choices. So we really do want to see successful projects. We really do want to help you as much as we can. And those GFRs, they deal with people like you every single day. And their job is to try to help you understand government bureaucracy, to help you navigate it so that you can submit, so that we're evaluating not based upon your ability to understand what we're asking for, but on how good your project actually is. Next slide. All right. Q&A. I know we've got a couple in here, and I didn't give us quite as much time as I would like to, but let's get to this. So, Ken, you want to read some of these off?
All right. I'll go ahead and we've got lots of questions, folks. Yeah, no worries, Shikana. Thank you. So first question, and folks, we're going to drop the links in and the webinar slides after the webinar. But first question, the medical office covers rural areas. The current sheet for calculating rurality scores requests physical locations. However, this would be in patient homes. How do we calculate this as non-fixed end users' addresses should not be submitted in the system? Go ahead, Shikana.
So I'll answer that real quick. That's based on the hub site. So whoever's actually, wherever the hub site is at, whether it's in an urban area or a rural community, that's where your scores are based off on non-fixed sites. So you really have to be careful about where your hub site is at, because that's how we calculate the score. So unfortunately, if you're putting this in people's homes in rural area, but you're downtown Atlanta, you may end up with a 0 score. So maybe partnering with somebody else in a rural area to act as the hub site might be beneficial, and then have services delivered out of, say, an urban site would be beneficial. For your specific project, it might be beneficial to reach out to your GFR and get some and ask some more questions on the hub user non-fixed sites and how that can fit together.
Excellent. Jacqueline, if I could ask you to go back one slide to that contact us link so everyone can see. Thank you so much. And we'll go on to the next question. And if we run out of time, this is, you want to reach out to your GFR or drop a question in the Contact Us help desk. Okay, next question. Can a for-profit technology deployment company qualify as the lead applicant if we are delivering AI-ready devices, workforce-focused digital literacy, and telehealth/distance learning infrastructure into eligible communities, or would we need to partner with an eligible public or nonprofit entity as the applicant?
So anybody can apply that fits those criteria. The issue that you would run into is if you're supplying your own equipment, is you have to go through the competitive bid process, and then there would be issues with you providing equipment that there's not a bid process there. So you have to make sure you understand not only our rules, but 2 CFR 200, which goes through the competitive grant process where you're doing that. So if you are actually the provider or a vendor, you may be better off. But even if you partner with somebody, they still have to go through a bid process. Now, if say a school or hospital has a prearranged bid process, you can follow that bid process if it's written and pre-approved. Some states already have selected vendors that have already done that, then that's where that's at. But you do have to go through the bid process to ensure effective and competitive process. The only waiver from the bid process is if there's only one person or one group that provides all of those resources. But still, because you have to go through and do invoices and those kind of things, if you're providing the equipment, then there would be an issue of conflict of interest if you're the actual applicant.
Okay, excellent. And this will probably be our last question as we're running out of time. So 10 points are being given. So this is a question on the socially vulnerable communities and reflecting in the worksheet. Shekinah, would you like to take that one as well?
Yeah, and I think, when we went through this, that there was she said very fast, but so the scoring, there was no change to scoring criteria. However, the 10 points for socially vulnerable was removed per EO 14.15.1. So those were actually removed for the additional 10 points. However, that being said, if you have a socially vulnerable community, you can account for that in your needs and benefits when you're talking about what the needs of that community are, and that can really help you on your general needs and benefits. So when you look at those scoring criteria, the first two are subjective. They are what they are. The last one is the objective criteria. So while you don't get the additional 10 points anymore because of that EO, what you can get is you can make sure that you can capitalize on that one objective scoring criteria or subjective scoring criteria and really capitalize that. So you want to talk about those kind of things when you're talking about the needs and benefits of the community and how your program is going to meet those.
We'll try to get in one more question here. So how do you calculate for a medical office that is not in a rural area but serves thousands of patients in rural areas? For example, purchase of telehealth equipment to be placed at the medical office to be able to reach patients in rural areas. How is the rurality score calculated here? Shannon, would you like to take that? Or
yeah, he's still. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Sure. If the site itself is going to be located in a non-rural area, as you kind of stated earlier, that's going to receive a 0 score if it's going to be some of a mobile site. But if you've got end-user sites that are going to be located within rural areas, we go off that census information, and we'll be using the average of those end-user sites where the machinery and equipment that is purchased is to be located.
All right, excellent. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for this webinar. We do have another webinar coming up next week that we encourage you to register for and attend, especially if you did not get your question answered on this one. We also encourage you to reach out again to your GFR or drop us a question in the help desk. And thank you so much for your attendance. And this concludes our webinar.